As we prepare for the day that commemorates the leadership and wisdom of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and we prepare for the inauguration of Donald Trump to another presidency, as we brace ourselves for this moment of history, there are two lenses I hope to bring to mind this week. One is beloved community. The other is prophetic imperative. What was the vision Dr. King invited us into dreaming about? And how will we proclaim our vision for a better future? Unitarian Universalists have always kept justice at the forefront of our religious concerns. And we have always seen it as a community project to sort through what is true. Truth isn't handed down from one single authority or scripture. Rather, the ability and the responsibility for discerning what is true is shared among us in community. James Luther Adams took these two pieces of our tradition, our concern for justice and our commitment to seek truth together, to describe the prophetic imperative, as he called it. He believed it was the responsibility of every single one of us to seek the truth and to speak the truth, even when it's scary. The truth isn't just an observation of what is, it's also a story about what one day might be. We don't talk about prophets much in our UU tradition, but the prophetic imperative refers back to ancient prophets as they were described in scriptures and traditions. There are a few defining features of the prophets that jump out quickly in the Hebrew Bible. One is a sense of risk involved in that role. The prophets usually had very unpopular messages to share, which made their task very dangerous. None of the prophets chose their role. Most of them tried to escape it. We all know Jonah ran from his calling until he was swallowed up by the whale. You might not know that nearly every other prophet, including Moses, tried to weasel his way out of that terrible responsibility of telling the truth, telling a hard story. Second, prophets were messengers. The prophets never lifted themselves up as special. It may be because what they were saying was really scary. They always made it clear that I'm just the messenger. Also, they didn't mince words about where their message was coming from. It was a holy truth. For them in those days, it was from God as they understood it. Finally, prophets cast a large vision of social change. They didn't suggest winning lottery numbers or who would win tomorrow's game. They talked broadly about big social change. Perhaps the most famous is the sweeping vision shared by the prophet Isaiah that they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nations shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Throughout time and around the world, humans have been called to deliver challenging messages and to act in new, bold ways, and it is always a challenge. Dr. King was another prophet whose message was dangerous. He knew it was dangerous long before he was assassinated. Before his house was bombed, he knew he was telling a holy truth that would make people really angry. He also knew that the job was his, and there was no getting out of it. So he shared his dream. The prophetic image that Dr. Martin Luther King shared was something he called beloved community. And there are 1,000 different ways of defining beloved community. But there's also a story about beloved community that may be more useful than trying to define it. This is the way the Reverend Clyde Grubbs and Mary Jane Holden tell the story. They say it sort of began with Rosa Parks. Well, actually long before then, in hundreds of different places in countless different ways. It began when the first slaves were brought to America. It began with the proclamation, with the Civil War and the Reconstruction and the countless broken promises. But for the person we remember this week, for Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., you could say it began with Rosa Parks. December 1st, 1955, Montgomery, Alabama, Rosa Parks, 42 years old, who's sitting in the front row of the black-only bus seats. A bus driver named Jimmy Blake told this tiny black woman to get up out of her seat so that a white man could sit down. And Rosa Parks said, "No, no, I will not. I am cold and I am tired, and I got here first. I'm sitting." While she waited, Jimmy Blake went to call the police. She got arrested and hauled away. Miss Parks was not the first person to protest bus segregation. Irene Morgan had done the same thing 9 years before, and Sarah Keyes had done it just a few months earlier. The U.S. Supreme Court had already said she didn't have to move. She had rights. Rosa Parks was making a point, and she knew it. She was secretary of the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP. When she said no to Jimmy Blake, she was already a worker for civil rights and racial equality. But this was the moment. She wasn't going to give in anymore, so she suffered for it. She lost her job as a seamstress at the local department store. But the president of the local NAACP, Ed Nixon, wanted Rosa Parks' arrest to be a test case so that Montgomery's black citizens would challenge the city. He and other leaders of the movement had been waiting for a case like this, for an act of injustice that would galvanize the community and pull them into action together. After the arrest, the NAACP organized a meeting of local ministers at the home church of a young, new minister in town, Martin Luther King, Jr. Shortly afterward, King was elected to lead the boycott, mostly because he was new in town and unknown. The power brokers of Montgomery hadn't had a chance to intimidate him yet. They actually had to push Dr. King to get him to take the job, but he did, finally, and the world started to change. The night of Rosa Parks' arrest, Joanne Robinson, the head of the Women's Political Council, distributed a flyer throughout Montgomery's black community telling everyone what had happened. Again, a woman had been arrested and thrown in jail. Everyone was, of course, encouraged to avoid the bus on Monday. The flyer even said, "Students could afford to miss one day of school, and parents, you can probably afford to miss one day of work. Take a cab or walk, but please, adults and children, don't ride the bus on Monday." So on December 3rd, almost no black people rode buses in Montgomery. They stayed home, they organized carpools. Some white homemakers drove their black domestic workers to work. Whether they were sympathetic to the cause or just wanted to not have their house cleaned is uncertain. But Dr. King said it best himself: a miracle had taken place. The city, of course, pushed back. They pressured the local insurance companies to drop the policy on those people who the insurance policy for those drivers of the carpools. But boycott leaders got creative, arranging for policies with Lloyd's of London to insure their cars. Black taxi drivers chipped in to help too. They charged their black fares only 10 cents for a ride, the same price as a bus ride. City officials didn't like that very much. They passed a new law that it was illegal to charge less than 45 cents for a taxi ride. But this boycott was not stopping until it made change. So they rode their bicycles and they walked. They even rode mules and horse-drawn buggies. Across the country, black churches raised money to support the boycott. They even collected shoes to replace the worn-out footwear of Montgomery citizens who were walking so much. The white racist power structure, especially a group called the White Citizens Council, fought back. Martin Luther King Jr.'s and Ralph Abernathy's houses were firebombed. So were 4 black Baptist churches. Boycotters were attacked and beaten all over town. Finally, the city of Montgomery hauled out a law passed way back in 1921 and started arresting protesters for hindering a bus. Eventually, Dr. King himself was arrested, spending 2 weeks in jail and becoming a national celebrity in the meantime. Later he said, "I was proud of my crime. It was a crime of joining my people in a nonviolent protest against injustice." The Montgomery bus boycott was an 11-month mass protest that ended with the U.S. Supreme Court ruling that public bus segregation is unconstitutional. The victory was big. Really, it was even more than that individual victory, though. The Montgomery bus boycott demonstrated the power of nonviolence to build beloved community and to reform American society. As he said in a speech at the victory rally following the announcement of the Supreme Court decision, the end is reconciliation. The end is redemption. The end is the creation of beloved community. It is this type of spirit and this type of love that can transform opponents into friends. It's this type of understanding, goodwill, that will transform the deep gloom of the old age into the exuberant gladness of the new age. It's this love which will bring about miracles in the hearts of men. Revisiting Dr. King's vision of beloved community was really helpful for me personally this week. Too often we try to understand beloved community or the work of Dr. King, avoiding the centrality of nonviolence in his legacy. The second principle of nonviolence states very clearly that the end result of nonviolence is redemption and reconciliation. The purpose of nonviolence is the creation of beloved community. The goal is not a reversal of the power structure. The goal is a fundamentally different picture so that we build power with one another rather than power over one another. King reminds us that at the end of this struggle, all of us are going to still be here. white people and people of color, straight people and queer people, disabled and temporarily able-bodied, American-born and immigrant, people of various faiths and no faith at all, and most important at this moment, people of all political parties will still share this country. Destroying or even aiming to harm our adversary is neither the goal or the means for reaching beloved community. It's a little bit like arguing within a family. We do it, but we do it very carefully, knowing that tomorrow we are still sharing this house together. Nonviolence is more than a political strategy. It's about how we respond, speak about, and even think about others. It's a framework for building compassionate friendship and family and communities and countries and worlds. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a theologian at heart. His theory of social change was based on what he believed about God and about humanity and about our connections with one another. His vision of God was in many ways similar to our universalist heritage. It was a God of a big, radical love. Beloved, community happens when all are welcomed at the table. It is universal in that sense. We believe, Unitarian Universalists, that courageous love will transform the world. We stand by the most vulnerable in society because we believe our salvation rests in the human ability to meet brokenness with compassion. More than the power of physical force or scientific innovation, even more than the intervention of some act of God, our capacity to heal the world and ourselves rests in our ability to meet vulnerability with compassion. And yes, I know it sounds incredibly hard. Beloved community is an ideal, something that we strive for. Not just for us here, but for a whole world. I'm glad that our UU tradition embraces the language of beloved community to honor the expansive, radical vision that Dr. King spoke of. But we have to be careful to not call an individual congregation a beloved community, as if we've gotten there and checked it off the list. Until we hold a potluck for Saddleback Church, the LGBT Community Center, the Orange County Sheriff's Department, and our black and brown neighbors. Until we create a space where lions lie down with lambs, we still have a ways to go. Beloved community means everyone is invited to forgive and be forgiven. It's a lofty goal that he described. But he's not the only prophet. Remember, the prophetic imperative is something that calls all of us. As you begin to sort out your truth, your message of the potential future, there are two disclaimers. First, speak from your heart, your core beliefs. Unitarian Universalism is hundreds of years old, with well-developed values rooted in deep love. Most of us don't see ourselves carrying God's message. That's okay. You don't have to have a huge religious vocabulary to talk through what you find to be holy and true. Our core values are a very good place to start. Justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity. always starting from and grounded in love. So what's your forecast for our world based in those values? Remember, the prophet speaks of what could be, either negative or positive. What could be if we continue down this path, or if we choose to follow our values. The other thing I would remind you is, you don't have to proclaim your vision from the rooftop necessarily. You can maybe share it with friends. Or for a while, just let that vision rest deep inside and inspire your actions or your choices. Though I do really like the idea of pulling out the bullhorn that we use at protests and giving everyone a chance to practice on the patio. We might do that one day. For me, the story of our future potential is about enough. I believe, I know there is a world possible not so far away where there is enough food, housing, educational opportunity, and health care for everyone. My vision, my dream is a departure from the story of bigger and brighter and faster and more. It's more grounded in sustainability and enough. It is so very possible I can taste it. Housing doesn't have to be luxurious. It just needs to be safe, private place that a reasonable person would choose. By the way, that is not a shelter. Even here in California, ensuring that human beings have housing is possible. There will be enough. I found this week that 18 million American households were food insecure in 2023. That means 13.5% of households didn't have enough to eat or didn't know where their next meal was coming from at some point during the year. That includes 1 in 5 children. We can do better than that. It's not just moralizing, we literally can do better than that. Healthcare for all is probably the easiest thing to imagine here because just about every other affluent in the country in the world has it. It's not designer medicine, but your broken bones will get fixed, and you don't have to choose between prescription medications and food. Oh, and abortions are available to people who need them. Safe, legal, rare, private, respectful, just like any other medical procedure. So possible. Really, this dream of mine is grounded in a sense of gratitude and generosity. It's about the inherent worth and dignity of every person. I don't know exactly the road that will get us there, but one absolutely necessary step is stopping the dehumanizing rhetoric about our neighbors. So I dream about a day when we recognize our abundance and begin to share it more broadly, even returning to the earth her due. I dream of knowing and living with the fact that there is enough. But what is your vision? Is it about innovation? Is it about compassion? Is it about creativity? Is it about our rainbow of diversity and the beauty that rests there? If your prophecy is one of warning about the road we are headed down, which God knows is appropriate, I hope you will pair it with a sprinkling of the alternative of what could be. What is your vision? What is your prophecy? What is your dream as we enter really a new chapter of this American story? Amen.